In a small house where Adam Farrell had lived alone for the past 20 years, he lay dead. Adam was a quiet and unfriendly person who had no friends during his lifetime. Only 2 men were present when he passed away. Dr. Stein got up from his seat and looked out the window into the growing darkness. He turned to his companion and asked, "Do you think you can stay here for the night?" The man, named Falred, agreed, saying, "Yes, of course. I suppose it's my responsibility." The doctor commented, "It's a rather pointless and old-fashioned tradition to stay awake with the dead, but I guess we have to follow it out of respect. Maybe I can find someone who will come here and help you during your watch." Falred shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked, and not many people knew him. I hardly knew him myself, but I don't mind keeping watch over his body." Dr. Stein took off his rubber gloves, and Falred watched the process with great interest. It almost fascinated him, although it made him shudder slightly as he remembered the cold and clammy touch of those gloves, like the touch of death itself. The doctor opened the door to leave and said, "If I can't find anyone, you might feel lonely tonight. You're not superstitious, are you?" Falred laughed and replied, "Not at all. Honestly, based on what I've heard about Farrell's personality, I'd rather be watching over his dead body than have been his guest while he was alive." The door closed and Falred began his watch. He sat down in the only chair in the room, glanced briefly at the covered shape on the bed across from him, and started reading by the dim light of a rough table lamp. As darkness fell outside, Falred put down his magazine to give his eyes a break. He looked again at the shape that used to be Adam Farrell, pondering why seeing a dead body was not only unpleasant, but also scary for many people. He lazily concluded that it was due to ignorance and a fear of death that made dead things unsettling. He idly wondered about the life of this old and grumpy man who had no family or friends and rarely left the house where he died. There were rumors of hidden wealth, but Falred had so little interest in it that he didn't even feel tempted to search the house for any treasure. With a casual shrug, he went back to reading. However, the task turned out to be more boring than he had thought for. After some time, he noticed that whenever he glanced up from his magazine and saw the bed with the lifeless body, he started involuntarily, as if he had, for an instant, forgotten the presence of the dead man and was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The reaction was small and natural, but he felt somewhat angry at himself. It was the first time he truly recognized the complete and suffocating silence that enveloped the house, a silence that seemed to be shared by the night, as no sounds reached him through the window. Adam Farrell had lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Falred shook himself, trying to clear his mind of unsettling thoughts, and returned to his reading. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the window, causing the light in the lamp to flicker and unexpectedly go out. Falred, cursing softly, groped in the darkness for matches, accidentally burning his fingers on the hot lamp chimney. He managed to strike a match, relit the lamp, and as he glanced over at the bed, he experienced a horrifying mental shock. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him, with dead eyes wide and empty, surrounded by the aged and wrinkled features. Even though Falred instinctively shuddered, his rational mind explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet covering the body had been carelessly thrown over the face, and the sudden gust of wind had disarranged and flung it aside. However, there was something frightening about it, something that filled him with a fearful sense of suggestion, as if, in the enveloping darkness, a lifeless hand had thrown aside the sheet, as if the corpse were about to rise. Falred, a man with a vivid imagination, shrugged off those frightening thoughts and walked across the room to cover the sheet back over the body. The dead eyes appeared to stare at him maliciously, carrying an evilness that surpassed the unfriendliness the man had shown in his lifetime. Falred recognized that it was his imagination at work, and he quickly restored the covering over the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh, slick and clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural aversion the living have towards the deceased, then returned to his chair and continued reading his magazine. Eventually, feeling drowsy, he lay down on a couch that was oddly included among the limited furniture in the room. He settled in, ready to fall asleep. He made up his mind to keep the light on, telling himself it was customary to leave lights burning for the dead. He didn't want to admit to himself that he was already beginning to feel uncomfortable lying in the darkness with the corpse. He dozed off, but suddenly woke up with a start, glancing at the covered figure on the bed. Silence filled the house, and darkness loomed outside. It was almost midnight, a time when strange thoughts can take hold of the mind. Falred glanced once more at the bed where the body lay, and he found the sight of the covered object extremely disturbing. Then an extraordinary idea took root in his mind and started to grow. He imagined that beneath the sheet, the lifeless body had transformed into a monstrous and conscious creature that stared at him with eyes that seemed to pierce through the fabric. He knew this idea was just a fantasy, influenced by legends of vampires, undead beings, and ghosts, those scary things that people have associated with the dead for ages. Since ancient times, when early humans first recognized death as something dreadful and separate from life, they have feared it. Falred believed that some of that fear carried over to the deceased, making them feared as well. The sight of the dead stirred up unsettling thoughts and awakened dim fears rooted in ancestral memory, lurking in the hidden corners of the mind. In any case, that silent, hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He considered uncovering the face, believing that familiarity would dispel his unsettling thoughts. He thought that seeing the calm and motionless features of the deceased would put an end to the wild speculations that were haunting him against his will. However, the idea of those lifeless eyes staring at him in the lamplight was unbearable. Finally, he blew out the light and lay down. This fear had crept upon him so subtly and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. But as soon as he turned off the light and could no longer see the body, everything returned to its normal state, and Falred fell asleep almost instantly. A faint smile lingered on his lips, a gentle expression of amusement at his previous foolishness. He woke up suddenly. He wasn't sure how long he had been asleep. Sitting up, his heart raced and cold sweat formed on his forehead. He instantly realized where he was and remembered the presence of the other person in the room. But what had disturbed his sleep? Ah, yes, now he recalled. A dreadful dream where the dead man had risen from the bed, moving stiffly across the room with fiery eyes and a terrifying smirk frozen on his pale lips. In the dream, Falred had felt completely still and and helpless. And just as the corpse reached out with a gnarled and horrifying hand, he had woken up. He tried to peer into the darkness, but the room was completely black, and the outside was so dark that no trace of light could enter through the window. He hesitantly reached out a trembling hand towards the lamp, but quickly drew it back as if avoiding a hidden snake. Sitting in the darkness with a wicked corpse was already terrifying, but he couldn't bring himself to light the lamp. He feared that whatever he might see would extinguish his sanity, like blowing out a candle. Horror consumed him, irrational and intense, as he surrendered to the instinctive fears that rose within him. All the legends he had heard returned to his mind, and he began to believe in them. Death was a dreadful thing, a mind-shattering terror that filled lifeless bodies with a dreadful malevolence. Adam Farrell had been a grumpy but harmless man in life, but now he appeared as a terror, a monstrous creature, a demon hiding in the shadows of fear, ready to pounce on humanity with claws immersed in death and madness. Falred sat frozen in fear, his blood running cold, as he battled silently within himself. Faint glimmers of reason tried to break through his terror, but they were quickly overshadowed by a soft, stealthy sound that made him freeze once more. Unaware that it was just the gentle whisper of the night wind against the windowsill, his frenzied imagination interpreted it as the footsteps of death and horror. He leaped off the couch, feeling indecisive. The idea of escape crossed his mind, but he was too overwhelmed to even think about a plan. Even his sense of direction seemed to have abandoned him. Fear had paralyzed his mind to such an extent that he couldn't think clearly. Darkness engulfed him, spreading like long waves, and its emptiness seeped into his thoughts. His movements, or what little he could muster, were automatic. He felt as if he were bound by heavy chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly, like those of someone lacking mental capacity. A terrible horror grew up in him, and an alarming idea took hold, suggesting that the deceased man was right behind him, approaching silently from behind. He no longer considered lighting the lamp. He couldn't think of anything else. Fear completely overwhelmed him, leaving no space for any other thought or feeling. He cautiously stepped back in the darkness, his hands behind him, instinctively feeling his way. Making a tremendous effort, he tried to shake off the suffocating fog of horror that enveloped him. With a cold sweat clinging to his body, he struggled to get his bearings. He couldn't see anything, but he knew the bed was across the room right in front of him. He was moving away from it. According to all natural laws, the dead man should be lying there. However, if, as he felt, something was behind him, then the old tales must be true. Death did infuse lifeless bodies with an otherworldly animation, and deceased individuals did wander in the shadows, carrying out their ghastly and malevolent intentions upon the living. Then, dear God, what was a human being but a helpless child, lost in the darkness and surrounded by terrifying beings from the pitch-black abysses and the unfathomable unknowns of space and time? He didn't arrive at these conclusions through reasoning. They appeared fully formed in his terror-stricken mind. Slowly, he continued moving backward, groping his way, firmly holding on to the belief that the dead man must be in front of him. Then, his outstretched hands unexpectedly came into contact with something smooth, cold, and moist, like the touch of death itself. A scream erupted and echoed through the room, followed by the crash of a falling body. The following morning, those who entered the house discovered two lifeless bodies in the room. Adam Farrell's covered corpse lay still on the bed, while across the room, Falred's body rested beneath the shelf where Dr. Stein had accidentally left his rubber gloves. These gloves, smooth and moist to the touch, felt just like the cold, clammy grip of death. It seemed that Falred, overwhelmed by fear, had met his tragic end. The rubber gloves, with their eerie resemblance to the touch of death, remained as a haunting reminder of the events that unfolded.